patriotic. Let's get back to imperial measurements, shall we? That's what Boris Johnson wants to do. He's expected to announce the return of imperial measurements to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee next week. The common sense move has been backed by Tory MPs as taking advantage of Brexit freedoms and an apparent attempt to garner support among Brexiteers amid the fallout of the Sue Gray report. EU rules state that all goods sold in Europe have to display metric weights and measurements, and traders are legally required to use metric units for their sale by weight or measure of fresh produce. While it was still legal to price goods in pounds and ounces, these had to be displayed alongside the price in grams and kilograms. On Friday, the government is expected to publish proposals to repeal the law. Ergo, if you want to just advertise fresh produce in pounds and ounces, you can. You no longer have to give the metric equivalent. Let's bring in our guests. I'm so looking forward to this. I've got Steve Braine with me, the Stop Brexit man. Can I just say that I'm looking at him on a screen because he's on FaceTime video, and he's got Saboteur and EU written on his shirt. He's got Tory lies cost lives in the background on big red signs, farming, fishing, finance, and then there's a word beginning with F afterwards. So Steve is with us. Hello, Steve.
Hi, how are you doing?
And I've also got Richard Braine with us, who is the former leader of UKIP, who I think is going to be advocating Imperial. So first of all, Steve, look, come on, mate, you're over 40, so you must be well used to Imperial measures. There's nothing wrong with having them.
No, I'm in my 50s now. When I went to school, everything that I was taught was metric. Although I am familiar with Imperial, metric is the way forward. It has been for many years. And let's face it, people under 50 probably don't get the Imperial system like those in their 60s, 70s and 80s.
I know, but Steve, we've left Europe now, so why should we follow this diktat?
Measurements are nothing to do with the European Union.
Yeah, but it's this diktat. Hang on, Steve.
Always
Steve,
display measurements.
Hang on a minute, Steve. I'm going to bring Richard in just a second.
Oh, my old friend.
EU rules state that all goods sold in Europe have to display metric weights and measurements. EU rules state that. So this is about dispensing with EU rules. We don't need them anymore because even though you're very upset about it, and I'm sorry, Brexit happened. So we don't need to be following EU rules about displaying metric measurements. It's just not necessary anymore.
It's not a rule.
What is it then? A directive? An instruction?
Look,
why did the metric masters get in trouble?
Look, if it was a rule, then why are all our traffic signs still in miles per hour? How can I still go into a pub and ask for a pint of lager? Because
it's about fresh produce, Steve. We're talking about fresh produce.
Okay, yeah. Fresh produce. You go to Tesco, you weigh out your fresh produce. On the scales, you will see a dual system. You will see pounds, ounces, and kilos and grams. It is up to you what weight you choose to buy.
But be honest with me,
Steve. Since Brexit, you get 20% less for your money now. That's what counts in a cost of living crisis.
Steve, just humour me for a minute, right? When you have been on your loudhailer all day in Westminster and maybe you've got a bit of a dry throat, right? Yes. You pop to the Red Lion and you go and ask for a pint of beer, don't you?
Well, no, it's full of Conservatives, so I won't go there.
Oh, Steve, honestly, I'm sure I've seen you in that pub. Let's bring in Richard Braine now. He's the former leader of UKIP. Richard, what have you got to say to Steve?
Well, I think it's over. You know, he's a man of the past. He's a piece of history, and he's very entertaining. But, you know, that decision's been made. And the great news is that we're now free to allow people freely to use the units that they like using, and very often they prefer to use the more convenient unit. So, as you yourself said, you know, 6 foot or 5'6", it's very easy to do. Whereas, as you say, 186 centimeters or whatever, it's more complicated. So, there's a lot of units that are easy, Imperial units that are easier to use, and people prefer them, and that's why people have stuck using them throughout this period since 1970 when we decimalised. And people still think about pounds and ounces, and we still have miles on our road signs, thankfully, which makes makes things easier for everybody, and people should be free to use the units they like. In astrophysics, astrophysicists can talk about astronomical units, they can talk about light years, they can use kilometers, miles. I had a physics teacher who made us provide our homework answers in horsepower furlong weekends, and we did the calculations to work out. It was all very simple, and we got the answers right sometimes and sometimes not. But the point about units is that we like to use units that are convenient for us, and we should be able to use units that are convenient for us. And so there's no requirement that the dictators in Brussels try to say you have to use these units, but very often people didn't like the units they were forced by law to use.
Okay, Richard, so dictators in Brussels.
Freedom is the answer.
Steve, dictators in Brussels. These are your leaders, Steve. He's talking about.
Can I ask Dick Braine a question? Dick, what sounds worse, a 35-mile queue at Dover, or a over 50-kilometre queue at Dover? At the end of the day,
Steve, I don't care. I think those issues will be sorted out, and I don't think they're very relevant. What's interesting about what's happened since we supposedly left the EU is that almost all of the terrible things that you and people like you predicted have failed to come true. There hasn't been a dogging epidemic. There hasn't been a meteor strike. There haven't been all the disasters.
20% more than it did prior to Brexit. And then when it comes to energy bills, I'm now getting half what I had prior to Brexit. OK, other things have come into play which have increased prices on energy. But leaving the European Union has increased prices, and you cannot deny that.
Before we deal with that, Steve,
lower inflation than the EU at the moment, considerably lower, more than a percentage point lower. So in fact, what's interesting is that Brexit has given us lower inflation than the people in the EU. The reasons for the inflation and the fuel prices are quite separate. They are to do with the terrible COVID lockdown. They are to do with Ukraine. They are to do with global affairs that have nothing to do with Brexit.
Steve, can I just ask Richard, do you like being called Dick?
Oh, people call me whatever they want. You know, I can live with the
Richard or Dick.
Whichever you like, Steve. You call me whatever you want.
Okay. Well, I won't do that on air, but
now, Steve, be nice, please. Look, you're arguing about Brexit here. Come on.
Me and Richard,
you can call me what you
go
want.
back quite a way.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, we do. We've known each other like six years or something. We've probably known each other.
So you love each other, really. Yeah, that's the point, isn't it, Steve? Shouldn't you go for a pint?
Steve, yeah.
Shouldn't you go for a pint with Richard as opposed to a half litre of beer?
Well, look, who asks for half a litre of beer when they go into a pub these days? Be realistic.
Actually, it's 568 millilitres is the correct amount. So it's not really half a litre. 568, that's a number you've got to remember if you want to order that right amount of beer, just the right amount for everybody's thirst. And so remember, 568 millilitres.
Richard, sorry. When all these football fans went to France to watch the match, how many of them were looking for a crown on their pint glass? They just wanted a bloody drink, be honest.
We're not talking about crowns. We're talking about what measures are convenient for people to use and whether people should be forced to use.
No, but they are going to add the crown
on the pint glass.
They are going to add the crown on the pint glass, Richard. So Steve makes a point.
I got no problem with that, but that's not about the measures, is it? That's just a symbol. It's not about the actual measures that you use, which is a different issue.
Yeah. But I've been to Malta, and there's a crown on the pint glass there, and you can still ask for a pint in Malta. And that's in the European Union. And they still do it today. It's not an issue.
But don't forget that people were actually convicted of using measures that the European Union forced us to use, of not using the measures that the European Union forced us to use.
See the evidence of who's been convicted and who's gone to prison for selling a pound of bananas in a banana state.
Steve Thoburn was convicted. Dove was convicted. There were 4 tradesmen convicted for selling goods in units that everybody likes using, that everybody was used to over hundreds of years, and they were convicted.
There's no problem with using dual units. Say I go into Tesco now and I want a pound of bananas. I'll put it on the scales to get a pound. But if I want a kilo of bananas, I'll just add a couple more, you know? What's the difference?
But they were convicted of not displaying, for instance, kilograms, and really it should be up to them and their customers.
So we're talking small market traders, yes?
But they were convicted. And the point here really is this, that a transaction between two people selling bananas or tomatoes, whatever it is, should be up to those people to agree, what units they're happy using between them. And if there's a vendor who sells something in a unit that you don't like, then you don't have to buy that.
It's then up to the customer whether they want to pursue that purchase. At the end of the day, look, dual units is fine.
I agree
but
with
just having one or the other,
Steve, I totally agree with you. It's up to the customer whether they want to pursue that purchase, but that's not what happened. What happened was the tradesmen were convicted of failing to show the units required by... Sorry, let me finish this, Steve, please. That they were convicted of failing to show the units that bureaucrats in Brussels had decreed must be used.
Nobody in Europe has ever said we cannot use pounds and ounces.
That's not what that was about. It was because they didn't display kilograms, the units that were decreed by the European Union in Brussels as being the units that they must advertise their wares with. And that's not free. Freedom is when you...
Okay, so we have millions...
Sorry, Steve, don't interrupt me. Let me make this point, that freedom, a really liberal mindset, is when customers and sellers can agree between them what units suit them both. And you find that sellers want to help their customers, so they'll always display the units that their customers want to know about. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. But to actually, like dictators, convict people for using a different unit and not using the unit you've decreed I think, is not liberal at all. I think it's a kind of totalitarianism, bureaucracy gone mad.
Oh, my gosh. Now you've mentioned dictators. Don't get me started on this government.
Oh, no. Hang on. I might have to intervene now. Let's not get Steve started on this government. Chaps, you've been very good sports. Thank you very much. I do think you should both have a pint together with a crown on it. That's my suggestion. Steve, are you up for it?
Hey, no problem. I mean,
I'm up for it, Steve. You've got my number. Let's go have a pint.
Yeah, at least you know that you're not going to be short on conversation.
At the end of the day, a theoretical question, a Tory MP, are they going to buy their drugs in pounds a kilo?
Steve...
or ounces of
right, on that bombshell, now the tech guy, let's just silence them because we've all got a little overexcited.
This is LBC.